Okay, well, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're thrilled that you're here and you're taking time out of your lunch break or your day to join us. This is a really important conversation, and we appreciate our friends and supporters for tuning in and helping out with our advocacy efforts here at Preservation Virginia. So today's program is previewing preservation in the General Assembly. It's the first in a winter webinar series that we're hosting this year that will also include discussions on historic preservation's role in affordable housing and fundraising for preservation projects. If you'd like to ask a question today, please use the Q&A function or the chat function at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to go through those at the end and look for those questions, and we'll pitch those to our esteemed panelists here. So just kind of hang tight. We'll go through the whole presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end, but feel free to put questions out there. Today, I'm joined by Julie Langen, Director of the Department of Historic Resources and State Historic Preservation Officer, Trip Pollard with the Southern Environmental Law Center and a longtime Preservation Virginia board member, and Zach Lemaster with Gentry Locke, who is our government relations contractor here at Preservation Virginia. So we're thrilled to have all three of y'all. Thank y'all for taking time for this. It means a lot. Our esteemed panel will take our participants through budget amendments included and not included in Governor Youngkin's proposed budget, possible legislation that could be coming up in the upcoming General Assembly legislative session, proposed budget amendments that we'd like to put out there during this session, and of course, Preservation Virginia's strategy for approaching all of these issues as they come up over the next couple of months. Preservation Virginia is in the unique position of operating 6 historic sites open to the public, while also performing advocacy for preservation policy in local, state, and federal government. So in this way, our team here at our central office in Richmond, we like to say that we talk the talk and we walk the walk when it comes to historic preservation best practices. In the upcoming legislative session, we'll have plenty of work to do. We're aware of that. We'll be tracking legislation regarding data centers, which is sure to come. The rapid expansion of the data center industry has communities debating changes to rural and historic landscapes and possible environmental impacts of data centers. So we'll be keeping an eye on all of that. The need for more affordable housing is certainly taking center stage as well. Through programs like historic tax credits, historic preservation is part of the affordable housing solution. But how can we find healthy strategies that balance infill and density with the preservation of historic districts and viewsheds? And this will undoubtedly be a very tight budget year. At Preservation Virginia, we're concerned about the impact of federal budget cuts to state agencies like the Department of Historic Resources, who are already stretched and getting all of their amazing work done. I mean, they do a whole lot. But if they lose some of their federal funding, that could be an issue. The National Park Service's Historic Preservation Fund is facing significant reductions in the coming year. There was a bill introduced in Congress to reinstate that program, but if it doesn't pass, if that federal funding does go away, how can the Commonwealth of Virginia help fill in the gap so DHR's projects and programs can continue unimpeded? Of course, your ongoing support is critical to all of these efforts as we track issues and advocate for healthy public policy on preservation issues. So please consider supporting Preservation Virginia so we can continue this work. Jump on our website, get involved, make a donation. All of that is a huge help as we tackle what's coming in the General Assembly in the coming weeks. But before I turn things over to our panel, I'd like to make a special thank you to Julie Langen for her leadership and commitment. Julie has been a wonderful and steadfast leader of the Department of Historic Resources, but is quickly approaching her much-deserved retirement. So we were honored that Julie offered to participate one more time in this webinar as the head of DHR, and I'm sure everyone on the call joins me in wishing Julie well and thanking her for her tremendous service to the Commonwealth over the last many years. So Julie, thank you so much for all you do, and we certainly we hope you come back next year for this webinar, maybe as a volunteer instead of an official capacity at
In
DHR. So,
attendee, yes,
right.
sure.
Well, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you, and first I'm going to share our PowerPoint really quickly here, and then you can kick things off.
All right. Well, thank you, Will. I want to start by thanking Preservation Virginia for hosting this annual preview each year. It's been a pleasure to participate, to always be included, and thank you for the opportunity again this year. And I will be a regular attendee in the years ahead. My role today is to speak to the upcoming session from the perspective of the department. And Will, are you going to advance slides? Good. Thank you
Yes,
for
ma'am, all
that.
set.
Yes. So I'm going to lead off by talking about what DHR requested, what we received in the governor's budget, what we didn't receive. What some people may not realize is that for us, a state agency, the budget process actually begins over the summer. So we're a few months now into this budget process. And we did submit a number of requests for increases to our funding. Uh, and these requests were to have those increases included in the governor's budget. And we were told that the budget forecast was not as favorable as in recent years and to not go crazy asking for too much. So our requests were modest and really focused on increasing our internal capacity. And that was our highest priority. We did not propose any new initiatives. So in total, we requested an increase in our general fund appropriation that totaled $625,000. And that would have included 4 additional staff positions. What was included in the governor's budget was an increase of $230,000 and 2 positions. And we're very grateful for that. And that funding and those positions would increase the capacity of our easement program. And some of the people attending this webinar may say, well, why the easement program and not the register program or the marker program? We have a problem with the easement program because of the volume of work coming in for new easements. And that increase is attributed to the fact that with the grant programs that we are very grateful to have, and some of the newer grant programs that we have, a condition of those grants is the donation of an easement. So that's really increased our volume, and it's made it such that it's very hard for us to keep up. So that's why we are prioritizing that program to increase its capacity. And that's all we asked for. Just a word about these various grant programs. The African American Cemeteries and Graves Fund, we received a robust increase during the last session. So we did not need to ask for additional funding this year. The BIPOC Fund has just a very little bit of money remaining in it, and we'll be able to do another round, and then we will be out of funds for that very important program. The Virginia 250 Preservation Fund was really intended to be a one and done, and so that money has all been awarded to projects that will have their work complete sometime this year in celebration of the semi-quincentennial. So no request for increase there. Level funding for the Battlefield Preservation Fund. The pass-through grants, and what we mean when we refer to pass-through grants, are those budget amendments put in by members. We never know what we're going to receive, but we typically get maybe 10, 12 of those projects that are earmarks within the budget. So we expect to see some of those. And then we have not requested additional funding for the highway marker program, but we have had certain grant programs in the past that enabled us to recognize some other underserved topics and constituencies. And right now we have just a little bit of funding for markers related to the sites of lynchings. And then next slide, there's one piece of legislation that I wanted to speak to that may be of interest to people, because it's certainly of interest to the Department of Historic Resources. That Senate Bill 68 that Senator Diggs has is the patron for, and it deals with the notifications that the department is required to provide before listing a property on the Virginia Landmarks Register. There was a similar effort during last session. This is, I think, a very important possible improvement to the notification process. It would not eliminate notifications to adjacent owners. It would mean that they would not receive an individual letter in the mail. We would still be doing the legal notices and the public hearings. But what we have experienced over the years is that sending someone an individual first-class letter who is an adjacent property owner and has no legal standing creates a lot of confusion. They think that they must have standing, or why else would we be sending them a letter? So we spend a lot of time clearing that up. It's also just not a good use of the Commonwealth's resources, because it takes a lot of staff time to generate these letters. And we have some very large rural historic districts on the horizon, some of which will have well over 1,000 adjacent property owners. So we think the time is right to address this issue and do it in a way that we're still communicating with the public at large and sending those individual letters just to the actual property owners. And then if we want to move on just to the last area of concern that I'm going to bring up, that is the wonderful, best in the country historic tax credit program. This program, since its inception, just continues to perform. I've included just a few statistics for to refresh your memory. Soon it will be time to update the economic impact studies that have been done collaboratively between the department and Preservation Virginia, roughly every 5 or 6 years, all of which have demonstrated a significant return to the Commonwealth for its investment in this program. And I think everybody knows that this program has transformed communities, large and small, urban and rural, and has leveraged an impressive amount of private investment. If you want to go to the next slide, Will, what some people may not realize is that this program really is assisting in providing additional affordable housing. And we haven't done a really good job of collecting that data. And I'm just showing you one of several good examples of projects that are targeting the affordable housing market, often combining the historic tax credit with the low income tax credits. But because the application itself doesn't require that a developer tell us the audience for their project, we don't always know that something is targeting affordable housing needs. So we're going to, at the department, think about how we can collect that data and really help educate people about the role that the historic tax credit is playing in addressing this important housing issue. So that's it. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julie. And I think we have some questions for you, which we'll save until the end. But it sounds like we need to consider updating our historic tax credit study this coming year, huh?
And I think the time is already here.
That's right. We should get cracking on that. But at this point, we're going to turn things over to our amazing team here at Preservation Virginia of Trip Pollard and Zach Lemaster to share our legislative agenda for the upcoming session.
Thanks, Will, and also wanted to thank Julie both for your remarks and to add to what Will said at the beginning. It's been wonderful working with you for more years than I think others maybe wants to acknowledge right now, but greatly appreciate all that you've done. And thanks to everyone for joining today. I'd like to just begin with a quick recap of last session for Preservation Virginia. So just a few of our highlights from last session. We did help secure additional funding for the BIPOC Fund as well as the African American Cemeteries Fund. A big issue for Preservation Virginia is the flooding issues at historic Jamestown, which we own and steward, and we proposed and secured an $8 million budget amendment to help address flood mitigation projects at Jamestown. Another focus of ours last session was defending the Historic Rehab Tax Credit Program, and pleased to say that no bills or budget amendments altered that program. And then final one just to mention is that some progress was made in updating code provisions on the state relationship with federally recognized tribes. So that's just a sample of some of the issues that Preservation worked on in the 2025 session. And I'll now turn it over to Zach to give you some flavor of what the upcoming session is likely to look like.
Yeah, thank you, Trip. I guess the big thing to highlight is obviously before we get into any specific issues is just the amount of new people that we're going to be dealing with. There's a lot of new friends to make in the House of Delegates and in the Senate. One new person, as well as obviously complete change in administration from not only just the elected officials but those who are appointed, and obviously with Julie retiring, making new friends with everyone else that's going to be at the department. So really, we don't know until when all the bills are filed who are going to be our champions, who are going to be people that we have to visit a few more times to have some more in-depth conversations with. But we're in the process right now of reviewing a lot of bills that are making their way through the DLS process. I should add, with all the new members coming in, there is going to be a lot of changes to committees as well. So members that we have developed great relationships with in the past and have a deep understanding of our issues may be moved to committees that we have nothing to do with us, and we'll have to re-educate new members. So there is a lot of change that is happening. There are ongoing special elections that are happening because a number of members have been tapped to join the Spanberger administration, and a lot of these people were members who were involved in a lot of issues that we dealt with. Mark Sickles was one of the key members of developing a budget, and Delegate Bulova chaired a lot of committees and dealt with a lot of budget issues that touch our issues, and Delegate Munden King as well. And then Mike Jones moving, a newer member who we've worked with on some issues and had some discussions with. So a lot of new members, a lot of change. This is not new or unique to our issue. This is something that everyone is obviously going through. So it is a growing pain for everyone. Happens every 4 years. And that's just part of the nature of the cycle of what we deal with. The good news is, I think we've got some strong advocates in the administration. And I think some of the conversations we've had with some of the incoming members have been very positive. So I think several of them have already toured Jamestown. We're happy to get all of them out there. And so there's a lot of good things that are happening. It just means that this session is going to be a lot of meeting people, figuring out what is a priority to them and to their district, and continuing to build those for really for next year and for years to come. So it's just do no harm is the goal this year in some of those relationships. I guess next slide's probably fine.
So thanks, Zach, for the kind of setting the landscape. Definitely a lot of change, a lot of time for education and getting information out. And so in terms of some of our top priorities that we see for the 26th session, the top one is, again, defending the historic rehab tax credit. Cannot stress too much how important this is. As Julie mentioned, it's been an incredibly successful tool, saving resources, revitalizing communities throughout the Commonwealth. And yes, Julie, it sounds like it is time for another issue of the DHR and Preservation Virginia studies, which have been incredibly helpful in generating support. Next slide, Will. Julie, you already gave some of the stats on it. It's, throughout the Commonwealth has made a tremendous difference, and developers continually point out without it, a lot of projects would not be moving forward. So next slide. As Will mentioned, we also plan to seek contingency funding for DHR. It gets roughly 17% of its funding from the federal government, and with the potential for federal cuts that would impact staff, we think it's prudent to have Virginians' provisions in the Virginia budget to fill as much of that gap as we can if federal funding is cut. Next slide. Some of our other priorities for the budget include supporting DHR on the easement positions that Julie mentioned, additional funding for the BIPOC fund, as was mentioned. There's not a whole lot left in there, so we need to get the General Assembly to replenish that. And then an item for a property Preservation Virginia owns is we will be putting in an amendment to request funding for a fire suppression system at Patrick Henry's Scotchtown in Henrico County, which unfortunately does not have a fire suppression system currently. So, so that's some of the top budget items we'll be focused on. There'll be a number of important policy issues as well, and I'll touch on just a few of those. First, tribal sovereignty remains an important issue. Among other things, there's going to be a bill this coming session that will broaden requirements for state agencies to consult with the 7 federally recognized tribes in Virginia on certain permits and projects. There also is going to be a bill to allow tribes to hold conservation easements and try to set forth some of the parameters of that. Next slide. As was mentioned at the top, and as I think every single person on this webinar is well aware, data centers are just a massive issue in Virginia for the preservation community, for our health, our environment, our economy, you name it, it's having an impact. So there were a host of bills last session, hardly anything passed. We expect a host of bills this session with a different, I'd say, political landscape. So at the very least, I think we'll see some attempts to reorient the tax incentives that are being given to at least put some parameters on that. And I think there also will be bills to limit or at least require consideration, for example, the impact of proposed data centers on historic resources. Next slide. And also housing is going to be a very big issue. Affordable housing is going to be a key issue next session. Historic preservation is such an important tool for expanding housing supply and promoting affordability. But it's also perceived by quite a few folks as a tool to block needed development. So there are going to be a number of bills as last session that will probably limit local land use authority in certain circumstances, and that could include historic district zoning. So we will very much be on the lookout for that, and we will be working to both protect the land use provisions for historic preservation while promoting more affordable housing, and also working to educate lawmakers about the important role of historic preservation and housing. And as Will mentioned at the very top, President of Virginia will be hosting a webinar on affordable housing and historic preservation. I wanted to put in another plug for that. That'll be February 4th at noon, and encourage you all to register and catch that. So those are just a quick tour of some of our quick top priorities, and I'll turn it over to Zach to talk a bit about the preservation process at Preservation Virginia, how we work through things for the upcoming session.
Yeah, and I'll just add that there's this another bucket of issues, which are all the ones that we haven't seen yet and hadn't heard of yet, that are going to be surprises to all of us, and those are always the scary ones. But yeah, we are currently in the process of reviewing legislation as it hits the filing system, as folks call us. We've had a lot of calls from people. I know former delegate Chris Pease called yesterday about a grant program to preserve some locations at historic campuses. We're going to be reviewing that bill. We're reviewing everything else as they come in. Some of those data center bills have already been filed. We're going to work through our legislative committee to basically make sure that all the language makes sense for everyone, that it does the most positive good it can do for preservation. And then we'll certainly send out updates, which I think there's a slide coming up here about how to register for all the updates. But from a General Assembly process, let me talk about kind of where we are right now. Today is the deadline for members to get the drafters of bills back requested edits. And so right now there's a dialogue between members and drafters as far as the legislation they'd like to introduce. Next week on January 14th, we will gavel in, and that will be the deadline to pre-file bills. And then we hit the ground running from there. January 16th will be the deadline for budget amendments. We will again review all of those as they come in. And then it's kind of go from there. The halfway point this year for session is around February 17th. So really the bulk of your work is going to be done as far as reviewing legislation and negotiating potentially solutions, and meeting with members will be done between the 14th of January and 17th of February. This is a long session. We're going to be there for 60 days. And assuming we don't extend any longer, but definitely 60 days. So we'll go out till March 14th, and then we will also come back April 22nd, I believe, is the reconvene date to deal with any governor vetoes or suggested amendments from the administration. So this is an ongoing process. As mentioned here below, as we review bills and make decisions about what the priorities are or where there may be concerns, we'll certainly get those out to you as quickly as possible. I think we're doing those on a weekly basis. If there are red alerts or big issues, we can certainly be nimble to make sure that everyone is alerted to those. Part of the challenge in dealing with the General Assembly is there's less than 24 hours notice normally as far as when committees are going to be meeting and when things will be docketed. And so it's an ongoing communication process where you're constantly checking in with members and stakeholders. And sometimes things get worked out to the last minute miraculously, but it is an ongoing process and one that we're going to be involved in with any kind of feedback, or if there's something that you all catch that is of concern that maybe we miss, or something that we don't have the expertise on, certainly alert us, because the more information, the better, as far as making proper decisions to make sure we're doing the best we can to advance the goals of preservation here in Virginia. And so I would say make sure you sign up for the alerts. Will, I think I don't know if there's a link that you can provide to everybody, but those are going to be going out Mondays. As I said, weekly, we'll certainly do additional ones as we need to. And communications are just vital. And if there's any kind of days where we need to get people onto the Hill, we'll give you as much notice as we can. After session, we'll do some wrap-ups as well to follow up on where legislation stands as it heads to the governor's desk, and we'll certainly do some additional updates after the governor takes her actions. As you know, all the bills will take effect unless otherwise stated July 1st. So that's kind of the sequence of what we're looking at. It's there's a lot that's going to be happening between now and then, but we will keep you as up to date as possible. All right.
And I think this last slide just kind of wraps it up, where we just reinforce, definitely follow us closely on social media. We'll be doing a lot of updates the next couple of months. We'll provide the link to register for our legislative alerts and your follow-up email that you'll get after the webinar here. But please come to the legislative reception. We'll have an online sign-up form for that we'll send around as well, but it's going to be a little bit early in the session this year, but January 29th at the same location we had it at last year, which is Redbird Social, just a couple blocks from the state capitol. We think it's pretty important to have it as close to the capitol as possible. And as issues come up regarding historic preservation, the best thing folks can do is contact their local elected officials about it. Quite often they usually want to hear from folks in their district, in their backyard, rather than just me sitting here in Richmond. So if there's things that you can activate your legislator on, please do, and we'll keep you informed on that as we go. Zach has really been a wonderful addition to the team. And I can tell you that we're working really hard on this stuff. We dedicate a lot of time to tracking these issues, and oftentimes Zach will call or text me and say, "This is where you need to be and when, and here's who we're talking to." And we make our pitch, we make our elevator speech about historic preservation. So I think we've got a pretty good system going here. But that does wrap up our initial presentation here. We have a few questions that we would like to share with the group, unless there's anything panelists want to add before I jump into the Q&A. Great. Well, one question that came up for you, Julie, was about the VA 250 fund, and if there's been any kind of rumblings about that coming back again. I know it was a one-off grant fund last year, but the 250th is technically about a decade long, if you want to count some of the other things that happened after the revolution. Is there any chance there could be grant funding like that again in the future, or are things just too tight right now?
Well, there's always a chance, but we didn't get any additional funding in the last budget, which would have been the logical time to have given it a boost. I will confess that my hope was that by establishing the Virginia 250 Fund, that was a program that could benefit any type of historic property, that we might whet the appetite of people to have a more permanent, general sort of fund. Because every other grant program that we have is specific to a certain type of property. And we don't have a general fund. I haven't heard any rumblings about someone's, advocating for that. I think it is the thing that we are missing here in Virginia.
Sure. If there was ever a state that you could make the case for that, right? Do other states do that, Julie? Do other states have like a bucket of money that folks can just apply to for general preservation, or is that pretty rare?
No, there's plenty of precedent for it. What's rare are the number of grant programs that Virginia has that are so specifically targeting, certain property types. And what is also rare is the level of state support that Virginia receives. So I don't want to sound ungrateful, because we really are head and shoulders above many other states. But the one thing we don't have is a fund that any historic property could apply for.
Right. For sure. And I have to say, that's one of the top calls that we get at our office in Richmond, and I'm sure it's the same thing at DHR, is that funding is always the most important thing. Where are the grant funds? And certainly for private homes, it's almost non-existent. And even for nonprofits or historic house museums, it's kind of tough, huh?
Yeah.
Sure. Understood. Well, something we'll aspire to trying to secure in the next decade or so. And there's a long history with DHR was once part of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and then it finally split off. Is that right? When did all that happen, Julie? Was that?
Oh, goodness. That happened back in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, after Governor Belial's impaneled a task force to look at historic preservation, a blue ribbon task force, and some of the recommendations that came out of that effort included the fact that the historic preservation activities should be handled by an independent agency.
Right. Which was wise. Um, well,
Yes.
and this next question, I think I'll throw Trip. You could probably help us, but I think Julie and I can weigh in as well. But we received a question about how is DHR and Preservation Virginia considering the impacts of climate change on historic resources, aside from our work at Jamestown, which has gotten a lot of attention. But how are we going to promote mitigation and adaptation measures over the next few decades as we deal with things like recurrent flooding and increasing storm events? There's so many historic resources in the Tidewater that's specifically affected, but even in places like Stanton, we've seen significant flooding in recent years up in the mountains. So, Trip, you have any thoughts about sort of the broader issue there?
Yeah, and I definitely will let Julie speak for DHR. But yeah, the problem which people tended to think of primarily as a coastal Tidewater one is actually, I think, with Helene and other issues, we now has brought very much into focus that it's a much broader problem in Virginia, and we have just a tremendous amount of historic resources that are at risk. Given the location of where so many of them were. There's a whole lot of open-ended questions and problems right now at the federal level with support there. But bringing it down to sort of Preservation Virginia, I think we're going to see, I believe, in the next administration, some additional funding flowing to resilience work. And I think that one of the things Preservation Virginia will be advocating for is trying to get due consideration of historic resources to be given some priority for getting part of that funding. Maybe not as good as the general pot of money Julie just mentioned that we'd love to see, but I think there is going to be more money going into resilience and I think and adaptation, and I think more broadly, but also I think for we'll try to prioritize and get some extra consideration for historic resources. And as much as anything else, it's also just the sharing of knowledge and awareness. And that's where I think the work we're doing at Jamestown will be helpful to people and groups throughout the Commonwealth.
Sure, it's a good point, Trip, that even though it's a very specific issue at Jamestown, what we learn through this process, we really want to share with other groups facing similar issues. For example, the Pamunkey Indian Tribe, their reservation in King William County was recently listed as one of America's most endangered historic places in the whole country because of sea level rise. So we want to work really closely with tribal leadership with the Pamunkey Nation to share what we learned through this process. And I think at Jamestown, what kind of where the push and pull is how do you preserve a historic site and a viewshed without changing the landscape too much? That can you avoid massive construction projects that really alter the experience there, but at the same time recognize that something needs to be done to stave off the rising water. So as we work through that process with our engineers who we're working with, that's definitely something we're going to share. And Julie, on the macro level, is that something DHR is wrestling with? I know in other communities like Charleston, there's a lot of talk about elevating buildings or moving buildings or not, that kind of thing.
Sure. What people may not realize is that over the last several years, DHR has received an emergency supplement from some of the disasters that have occurred that has enabled us to fund some resiliency plans for communities. It's allowed us to survey and document properties that are threatened by future natural disaster and flooding. There is flexibility built into the standards for modifying properties to be more resilient. So we're seeing a little bit of that happening within some grant and tax credit programs, but there's not a dedicated source of funding for something like that.
Right. So
But it's
often.
very much on our radar, and of course, is impacting owners of historic properties throughout the Commonwealth.
Sure. And I know some of our partners in Suffolk, Commonwealth Preservation Group and others, they've been literally researching the resiliency of historic materials.
Yeah.
Paige Pollard and her team and other folks are trying to make the case about really to FEMA and insurance companies, hey, if something gets flooded, it doesn't necessarily means it needs to be gutted after the fact. Yeah, you can actually preserve and save a lot of the original historic fabric, even if it does flood out. So there's some dynamic and interesting research going on, but we don't have all the answers just yet, though. So I think that's fair to say. And I think this we had one question I think fits for Zach, and that was just about being open about what we're really dealing with in terms of the budget. Zach, I mean, what are you hearing in terms of how tight is it going to be? Are things
Yeah.
looking kind of grim or not as bad as they thought? Just based on some of the changes in Washington that are going on.
Um, yeah, I think it's going to be one of the most challenging years I think we've had in a while, um, for a budget perspective. You've got a rapidly changing uh, federal situation from day to day. I think there's you don't know what's going to happen, so you've got to built in some uh, contingency funds, kind of like we had talked about, just conceptually from there, and that can change on a dime at this point. So there's certainly uncertainty from the federal perspective, which certainly and part of the issue with the budget that we're dealing with now is nothing with our area. It's Medicaid and Medicare and other parts of the budget that just eat up everything. And so with those dedicated and required funding that has to be made. There's just not additional funds for anything else. Luckily, depending on who you ask, we're not in a recession yet. So I think some of the revenues have been better than people expected, but there's just been an elevated need to meet from things that you just have to fund. And so several members, very important members on the budget committee, have said, do not bring budget amendments this year. Um, and I think some small one-time things will be funded, but any ongoing large projects are going to be a challenge. And so, and frankly, again, we're dealing with new people. Obviously, the governor and her administration are going to want to weigh in as well, and there's just additional uncertainty there. While I'll probably be supportive, it's just uncertainty about how everyone will approach these challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that, Zach. I think the outlook isn't great, but we don't have all the numbers yet. So there's still some opportunity for some certain projects to get funded and things, but certainly our legislature has a lot to consider in the next few weeks. And I think we'll end on one last question here, and this is a good one. It does kind of speak to the changes in DC and how that might impact politics in Richmond and policy. And Julie, you could probably speak to this better than any of us, but given shifts in the federal Section 106 review or proposed changes to Section 106, have there been any discussions about the Commonwealth changing some of our review requirements or our expectations to kind of make up any gaps that could be left on the federal review side? Basically, in a sense, if things are deregulated on the national level, could we increase some oversight on the state level? Has any of that come up at all?
I love this question. Thank you for asking it. Um, I have not heard any conversation around that, and I would love for someone to tell me that they have heard conversation about it, because it's very concerning, and it should be concerning to all of us that things are changing on the federal level. The expectations are changing. There are expedited reviews taking place. There's reason to be concerned that there are even more changes that might be coming.
Sure. And I think on a local level, localities are really wrestling with that as well when it comes to density and infill and development. That just this idea that through deregulation, we might be able to build faster and further. And I think there's some noble ideals in that, but it's just sometimes when the rubber meets the road, you just want to make sure that we're not losing cultural resources on a massive scale. Around the office, we've been calling it, can we avoid urban renewal 2.0 from happening, while also addressing affordable housing concerns in the state. So, yeah, at the state, federal, and local levels, there's just a lot of discussions happening, a lot to think about this next year. So we're working hard on all of these issues for sure. But with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But any other final thoughts from our panelists? We really appreciate y'all being here today, and I think we got a lot out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah, thanks. Just encourage people to get involved and show up for the next webinar as well as the legislative reception and reach out to your legislators. It's you all who make an enormous, enormous difference.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So yeah, please come on January 29th, and our follow-up email will send you some links to our upcoming events, webinars, and ways you can help. But this was a great crowd today. We had a good group, and just thank you all for taking time for us today. I'm sure you're all very busy. So um, cheers to a successful 2026. Wish us luck, and we will see y'all hopefully February 4th or January 29th at one of our upcoming events. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, okay?
So,